There's a little bit of a bait and switch here. Was supposed to be doing iPhone apps.
There's a little bit of iPhone in there.
But this is a much more interesting topic. It's about using shoes to have fun. And I'm glad that I've dressed appropriately. So this is Tim Elliott. He's from Chico. He rode his bicycle all the way down here from Chico on Thursday. So, give him a hand.
Thanks. My legs still hurt, by the way.
Yeah, the lengths people go to for Ruby conferences. Mm-hmm. So he works at Travidia up in Chico, and he's a Rails developer, and he's going to talk to you about using shoes to have fun.
Thanks, Josh. So first off, sorry for the kind of bait and switch. I was preparing my presentation during the past couple of days, and the thing I'm really passionate about with shoes is that it's allowed me to have a lot of fun in programming, and it has some practical applications, including being able to prototype iPhone apps. But I kind of switched the title because the highlight for me is really the fun that I have found by programming in shoes. And this is actually kind of what I'm doing here, is I'm subjecting you to more fun instead of the iPhone stuff that you're expecting. This is, by the way, a frame from Nobody Knows Shoes. It's a comic book that Y released when he announced shoes in the first place. It's a very highly recommended read for expert programmers and beginners alike. It's just kind of comics and a good intro to all the basics in shoes. So back in 2003, Y the Lucky Stiff made a blog post called The Little Coder's Predicament. And it's actually quite a lengthy blog post if you Google it. It's a really good read. And this post is kind of a call to arms for programmers to pretty much have more fun in programming and make it more accessible to non-programmers and beginning programmers. And this phrase in particular really appealed to me because it reminded me of when I was like 9 years old, and my parents used to go shopping, and they dropped me off at a department store, and I'd go either play in the toy department or I'd go to the computer department, and usually there was like a C64 or an Amiga there, and pretty much every like C64 was just waiting for me to write a program and announce to the world how much I rule. And it was really easy because I didn't even own a C64, and I knew how to do this. Through the grapevine, I pretty much found out that in BASIC you can make it do really fun things really, really easily. So fast forward to about a year ago, when my neighbor Henry, who's 7 years old, said that he wanted to learn how to program. He really likes computers. And being a Rails developer, I thought, well, I'll create a Rails application with Henry. So I asked him what he wanted to do, and he said he liked to make a program with cats. So I started setting up his Windows machine with Rails. And off the bat, it requires a lot of, especially for someone who's beginning, a lot of downloads to get up and running. The one-click installer, by the way, is awesome. It works very well. But it's just a lot of different things that you have to install, including MySQL or SQLite if you're going to do any kind of permanent storage, and then Rails gems and other gems that you happen to use. So the next stuff is pretty straightforward. We're going to create a cat application and generate a scaffold for cats. Start up our server, maybe add some properties to our cats, and I was able to show Henry that he can now create cats up the kazoo. He can create thousands of cats. As a matter of fact, with Hypertable, we can create millions per second. We could cover the world with cats. But Henry was not all that impressed because he really wanted the cats to maybe chase the mouse around the screen. So that, especially from my perspective, then requires JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and pretty much it's not the right framework for this task. And that's where Shoes fits in. Shoes is a framework that has a single installer. You can very quickly and easily draw and animate. It's all done in Ruby that we're all familiar with, and it makes it very, very easy to once you created something, to share those programs with your friends. For developers, getting into Shoes, the big thing that hit me at first is that Shoes is not actually a gem. So you can't install it in whatever installation that you're familiar with or that you're comfortable with. So I was a little bit taken aback at first that I couldn't use the Ruby distribution that I've been using, and actually had to install a new one. But it's actually for a very good reason, and that is that Shoes is not really meant to be geared towards developers. It's really geared towards people who are installing it for the first time. So by installing the Shoes distribution separately, you're actually also putting yourself in the shoes of someone who's just installed Shoes for the first time. What Shoes actually is it's a very small GUI toolkit. It's written predominantly in C. It embeds Ruby, and it also has a packager and a few gems installed. And I guess I'll move straight on to the layout engine in Shoes. Shoes has a very flexible but also extremely simple layout engine, and it's really easy to understand if you're coming from a web background. It has two concepts. One of them is stacks. They're a lot like block level elements in HTML. They're basically each element that you place in a stack will take up the entire width, and the next element will then be placed underneath it, will be stacked downwards. There's also a little example in here of how to print out a paragraph of text with para, and a small example of creating buttons that pop up little alert windows, a lot like JavaScript. Here's an example of flows. This application, every time you click the right monkey button, will either add pirates or Navy SEALs to the list. And you can see in flows, they kind of go left to right and then top to bottom, a lot like in HTML elements that are floated left. Now, once you add a couple of stacks and flows in, you can add controls in there. There's a button control, check boxes, pretty much all the controls you're familiar with from HTML. You can also do complex layouts by putting flows in stacks or stacks in flows, and pretty much create any complex layout that you can imagine using just those two principles. Finally, once you have your flows and your controls in there, you wrap everything in a Shoes app block. The Shoes app block does a little bit of magic. It actually class evals everything inside of it in the Shoes class. In the Shoes class, and what that allows you to do actually is instead of having to say self.para, self.window, you can just use the class methods directly, and it kind of makes syntactically for a nicer application. You can also put your own classes outside of the Shoes app block and use them inside, but there's one thing that you might run into if you do that, and that is that once you do use classes from outside of the Shoes app, the syntactic or the class eval that I was just talking about does not actually kick in. So in this case, the add beans instance method of Mango, the call to para right there will fail because Mango does not have a para method. So a way to get around that is to take advantage of the fact that every Shoes element has an app attribute, and that actually points to the app instance. And so if you make a block out of that, it then evals it at the class instance level, and then you can actually use the para class, or para method. Another thing to note is that shoes kind of keeps an array in form of a stack in memory that kind of keeps track of where to render everything. So when you have stacks within flows or flows within stacks, and you start putting controls in there or start drawing text in there, Shoes knows where to put those. And sometimes it's kind of confusing. You're not really sure, well, if I call a method and that then outputs some text, where will that text show up? But if you kind of keep in mind that Shoes is always kind of tracking which container you're in, then you can kind of get an idea of where everything will show up. Another thing to watch out for with Shoes is that any long-running tasks or any I/O by the operating system will kill interactivity. It's actually kind of similar to Rails, and so similarly, you want to kind of keep, if you take an action after the user does something, you want to keep it, break it into small segments so that the main loop can come back. You could potentially also maybe try using some background frameworks that Rails uses as well, but I haven't actually played with that yet. And now I'll give a quick demo of Shoes. And I'm going to write a small Shoes app. So that's the Shoes app block, and you can draw shapes of any form. You can do ovals, for example. So we're going to draw an oval, and the width of the current window, this width right here, actually again gets evaluated at the class level. So this will be the width of your Shoes window, and we can maybe pick a random spot within the width. Oops. And maybe the final one is how big your oval or your circle will be. And we can actually also add the fill color for it, and we're going to make it a random RGB value. And you can also add alpha transparency, so like 0.5%. And let's see if I did this right or screwed up. All right, so that draws one circle. Not all that exciting. But we can now maybe do 200 of those. Oops. And draw 200 circles. I'm not very artistically inclined, but if you were, you could do some pretty fun stuff with this. Because you can also wrap this then in an animate. Oops. And you can tell it how many frames per second you want to do. And actually, you want to, in between, also clear. Yeah, it takes a block. And now we're animating circles. You can also, instead of circles, you can do lines. Cats. You can do lol cats, maybe. Or you could do squares. Oops. So you can pretty much have fun right off the bat with all kinds of random little toys. Oh yeah, shoes, by the way, also, I've been using the online manual for shoes at shoes.net, spelled with 3 O's. But Seth yesterday actually pointed out to me that the manual that comes with shoes when you launch shoes is actually way cooler because it's written in shoes and it has a really cool search. So you can actually search for stuff like download or something, and you can actually browse shoes methods in this shoes app, and you can actually run the methods instantly in shoes. So it's going to actually launch that demo right there. So it's a really cool online documentation that comes with shoes if you install it. So another application of this would be rapid prototyping. It's meant to be super easy to create interfaces with it, so it lends itself very well towards either prototyping desktop apps or iPhone applications. Advantages: you get to do it all in Ruby, and you can do fun stuff like drawing and animating. Here's an example of if you were, or a beginning of an example if you were to prototype an iPhone app. It's only a few lines of code, but it kind of draws out for you your, what maybe a table view would look like. And you can pretty easily then add functionality to something like this. Now, when you've written your shoes applications, it's actually really easy to share it with other people. If you're running shoes, you can actually launch a packager that will take your shoes application and create from it either an exe installer or an sh script that will install it in Linux, or a DMG for OS X installation. A shoes app weighs about 3 megabytes if you don't use video support. If you include VLC as part of it, it'll come in around 10 megabytes or so, maybe 7 actually. Another trick is that you can use Ruby debug in shoes to interactively debug your shoes application. The way I've been doing this is by using the shoes setup block, in which you can actually include gems. A very cool thing about this block is if you distribute a shoes application that has the setup block and somebody else runs it, shoes has a gem installer GUI that will come up and dynamically install those gems for the user. And you can require Ruby debug, and then by planting a debugger statement, for example, in a button, you can then interactively kind of poke around in your shoes application. A couple more cool things shoes does is it includes native HTTP download libraries for Windows, OS X, and Linux, because the Ruby HTTP library is a little bit slow, and because of threading issues also. Shoes also has a really cool HTTP caching implementation that actually saves all of your images once they've been downloaded. Very similar to the way Firefox does it in SQLite database. And as of recently, Shoes also, not yet in the official distribution, but in the Git version, Shoes includes Bloopsophone, which is a really fun kind of audio library that lets you create Atari-like sounds with noise and everything. And it's also, as all of Y's other APIs, it's very, very easy and fun to use. And most of all, Shoes is really cool for having fun and just doing fun stuff. In this application, I created, and I kind of broke it, so I can't demo it right now, but I created a whole bunch of robots and just had them kind of aimlessly wandering around. And I asked Henry what I could do with them, and he suggested, well, why don't you have them eat each other? And once they get too big, they pop and turn into smaller robots again. And this thing will run continuously. And you can just kind of be creative and have a lot of fun. One thing I noticed when I started playing around with Shoes is that all of a sudden I could connect with my roommates and with other non-programmer friends on what I'm doing on the computer, because most of the Rails stuff that I do is is usually for business or it's for websites. But when I tell them, yeah, I'm making robots and they're eating each other up and they're exploding, then people actually, you can connect with non-programmers and people might give you ideas. And it's one of my favorite aspects that I've gotten from using Shoes is that it's allowed me to connect my passion for programming with other friends who are not necessarily programmers as well. For more information, you can go to shoes.net. The Shoebox is a really cool collection of user-submitted Shoes applications, and Nobody Knows Shoes is one of my favorite comic books and a really cool guide to get people started on using Shoes. And that wraps up my presentation. I'll take some questions. Thank you. Yes?
You mentioned iPhone development. Can you go into more detail? Is it possible? That's all I need to know.
Well, it's not possible to run Shoes apps on the iPhone, but I think it's very, very useful for especially because I'm a Ruby developer primarily, and I was starting to get into Objective-C, and it was a lot easier for me to start mapping out prototypes using Shoes. And I mean, Shoes is pretty much perfect for that purpose. And in the process, actually ironed out a lot of user interface and a lot of data structure kind of details before I even had to go into the Objective-C part of it. So for that purpose, I very much recommend it. All right. Well, thank you much.